We now come to the motion on the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order, which will be debated with the motion on the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order. I call the Minister to move the first motion. Sir Stephen Tiff.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2025, which was laid before the House on the 15th of January, and the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order 2025, laid before the House on the 16th of January, be approved. And in my view, the provisions in the instruments are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. First of all, let me say a little about the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order. It will increase relevant state pension rates by 4.1%, in line with the growth in average earnings in the year to May to July 2024. It will increase most other benefit rates by 1.7%, in line with the rise in the Consumer Prices Index in the year to September 2024. The government's commitment to the triple lock means that the basic and full rate of the new state pension will be uprated by the highest of the growth in earnings or prices, or 2.5%. This will mean 4.1% for 2025-26. From April this year, the basic state pension will increase from £169.50 per week to £176.45, and the full rate of the new state pension will increase from £221.20 to £230.25. We are fully committed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to maintaining the pensions triple lock. There's some confusion currently about the position of the party opposite, and I hope that the Shadow Minister will clarify that position when he speaks shortly. Yes, I'll gladly give way.
I'm giving way. When it comes to clarification, could you clarify for how much longer will the state pension be taxed? The Conservative government stood on the triple lock plus. We lost the election, but we're going to take that fiscal drag out. Could you explain when that tax will be put in place, or how long it stays in place till?
Minister.
Well, my understanding from what the Leader of the Opposition has said is that the party opposite is no longer committed to the triple lock, let alone the triple lock plus. But I can tell him we don't have any plans to do what he suggests.
I believe it's up until 2028 that the government is looking at reviewing that. That means that if you're on a state pension at the moment, you are actually getting have to submit a tax return because the state pension is being taxed. So I agreed. It was something that was brought in by the government, and we campaigned on this side to remove that. Can he confirm it's 2028 that this will remain in place until?
Minister.
Well, I can simply point out to him that his party appears no longer to be committed to the triple lock, and we'll look forward to clarification on that point from the Shadow Minister. But other components of state pension awards, such as those previously built up under earnings-related state pension schemes, including the additional state pension, will increase by 1.7% in line with prices. The government is committed to supporting pensioners on the lowest incomes, and so the safety net provided by the pension credit standard minimum guarantee will increase by 4.1%. For single pensioners, that means an increase from £218.15 to £227.10 per week, and for couples from £332.95 to £346.60 per week. And we want everybody entitled to that support to receive it, which is why we launched the National Pension Credit Campaign, and we received around 150,000 pension credit applications in the 16 weeks after the winter fuel payment announcement. I'll give away one more to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful for him, and we do indeed want more people to take up pension credit. One of the biggest problems is the processing time. Now, written questions I tabled before Christmas showed that there was a 75% success rate in getting them done within 50 days, which means 1 in 4 wasn't doing that. That was then, I retabled the same question. It turns out that actually the standard had got worse. What work is the government doing to make sure that when people apply over those 50 days, they are met within that 50 days, especially when it's cold and the winter fuel payment has been taken? It's really important if people need that support, they get it as soon as they possibly can.
Well, he's quite right. It is important that the applications are processed in a speedy way, and I'm very pleased with the number of applications there have been. I can confirm, and I think he knows this, that everybody who applies before the 21st of December will receive, if they're successful, will receive their winter fuel payment. And we have, of course, moved extra staff onto pension credit processing. But he's quite right to raise that point. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, universal credit and the legacy means-tested benefits it replaces provide support for people of working age. We've committed in our manifesto to review universal credit so that it makes work pay and tackles poverty, and we'll be setting out shortly how we plan to fulfil that commitment. For those below state pension age, the order increases the personal and standard allowances of working age benefits, including universal credit, by 1.7%, in line with the increase in prices in the year to September 2024. In the budget last November, the Chancellor announced that the maximum repayment deduction from universal credit payments will be reduced from April from 25% of the universal credit standard allowance to 15%. The fair repayment rate. 1.2 million households are expected to benefit from that change by an average of £420 per year. In addition, the order increases statutory payments by 1.7%. That includes statutory maternity pay, statutory paternity pay, statutory shared parental pay, and statutory sick pay. Benefits for those who have additional costs as a result of disability or health impairments will also increase by 1.7%. That includes disability living allowance, attendance allowance, and personal independence payment. The order will also increase carers allowance by 1.7%. The Chancellor announced in the budget that from April, the weekly carers allowance earnings threshold will be pegged to the level of 16 hours work at the national living wage. That means that from April, unpaid carers will be able to earn up to £196 per week net earnings and still receive carers allowance, compared to £151 now. That move has been very widely welcomed, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to say, and we expect it to bring an additional 60,000 unpaid carers into eligibility for the benefit, and crucially, to reduce the likelihood of carers managing to combine some work with their caring responsibilities, inadvertently falling foul of the earnings limit, because in future that threshold will keep up with changes in the national living wage. With disability and carers benefits, we will continue to ensure carers and people who face additional costs because of disability or health impairment get the support that they need, and we'll set out proposals for reform of health and disability benefits in a green paper in the spring. Yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way. In my constituency of Horsham last year, food bank usage increased by 25% and by 700% over 6 years. In the light of evidence of these pressures, would the government consider putting a minimum level on universal credit?
Minister.
Well, I have seen representations along those lines, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's not something that we are looking at the moment, but what I would say to him is that we are, as I've mentioned, we are committed to reviewing universal credit, and we'll be doing it over the course of this year, and we'll be looking at a very wide variety, I imagine, of representations, and he and others will be very welcome to make a submission along those lines to us. But lastly, let me say a word about the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order 2025. I'll gladly give way.
To the pension issue, the order requires the Secretary of State to examine the effects of benefit uprating and the effects of the existing payment of benefits. What studies has he done into the effects of the two-child benefit cap? And secondly, last week we passed a welfare spending cap, which obviously could be breached in the future. Is the government going to revisit the whole idea of the welfare cap with a view to abolishing it in order to ensure that the motive force in deciding on benefits is the level of need rather than a arbitrary figure decided by the Treasury?
Minister.
Well, on the two-child limit, as he knows, we set up very quickly after the general election the Child Poverty Task Force. That is looking in a very ambitious way at the whole range of levers that the government has at its disposal for tackling the problem of child poverty. We would very much like to repeat the success of the last Labour government in reducing child poverty so dramatically in the period in which that government was in office. And I say that feeling with particularly strong feeling, having taken the Child Poverty Act through the House towards the end of that government's term. And part of that consideration certainly will be at social security changes, looking at what changes there might be appropriate. We're not able to say that the two-child limit will be removed, but all of those things will be considered very carefully in the course of producing the report which the task force will bring forward. I'm not. We're not looking, I don't think, at changing the arrangements around the overall welfare cap. Of course, there's always some confusion between the individual benefit cap and the overall welfare cap. And as he says, there was a debate last week at which my honourable friend spoke about the overall cap. But there's certainly scope for debate about that, and indeed about the benefit cap as well. But we're not proposing any changes to those arrangements in the short term. Madam Deputy Speaker, so the GMP order sets out the yearly amount by which the guaranteed minimum pension, GMP, part of an individual's contracted out occupational pension earned between April 1988 and April 1997 must be increased if it is in payment. The increase is paid by occupational pension schemes, helps to provide a measure of inflation protection to people who are in receipt of GMPs earned between those 2 years. Legislation requires that GMPs earned between those two dates must be increased by the percentage increase in the general level of prices as measured the previous September, capped at 3%. So this year it means that the order will increase the relevant part of the GMP by the September 2024 Consumer Price Index figure, which is 1.7%. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order, if Parliament approves it this afternoon, commits the government to increased expenditure of £6.9 billion in 2025-26. Changes will mainly come into effect from the 7th of April and will apply for the tax year 2025-26. The order maintains a triple lock, benefiting pensioners who are in receipt of the basic and new state pensions, raises the level of the safety net in pension credit beyond the increase in prices, increases the rate of benefits for people in the labour market, and increases the rates of carers' benefits and support to help with additional costs arising from disability or health impairment. The draft GMP order requires formally contracted out occupational pension schemes to pay an increase of 1.7% on GMPs in payment earned between April 1988 and April 1997, providing people with a measure of protection against inflation paid for by their scheme. And so I commend the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2025 and the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order 2025 to the House.
The question is the motion on the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order as on the order paper. And I call the Shadow Minister, Ghani Kruger.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me just state at the outset that on these benches we support the measure to uprate pensions in line with earnings and benefits in line with inflation. And I'm honoured personally to take part in this important annual ritual, which is never well attended but always a high quality debate. And the traditional star of this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, is, of course, the Right Honourable Gentleman who has descended this year from his traditional, from the clouds of the Select Committee to the sweaty arena of ministerial office. No one is more qualified than him to take the office that he now has. No one has more genuine expertise and compassion for the people that we all want to support than him. So I'm very pleased that he's in this role. I do just note in passing how much I think the House misses the expertise of members who've departed: Paul Maynard, David Linden, Nigel Mills, all used to take part in this debate with great value and contribution. I just welcome Honourable friend Member for Bosworth, who's taking up his position as a new star of this annual debate. Now, despite the formality, it is an important debate because it's an opportunity for us to take stock of the welfare and the pensions system as a whole. And as pensions were mentioned and the triple log, I'm happy to clarify for the Honourable Gentleman, I think he's misunderstood, or our leader's position has clearly been misquoted. We're not looking at cancelling the triple log. It's his colleague, the new Pensions Minister, who's been very clearly quoted saying that the triple lock is a silly system and indefensible. So I look forward to further clarification from those benches. Well, I give way to the Honourable Gentleman at the back.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you to the Shadow Minister for giving way. Can I just check, though? I understand it that the Shadow Chancellor's said that the triple lock is unsustainable. Do you agree with the Shadow Chancellor on that point?
Well, there are clearly questions
about
the long-term sustainability of our pension system and our National Insurance Fund. But I think he was talking about the very long term rather than the immediate situation which we're in, and there's no intention to review the triple lock at this stage on our benches anyway. Happy to give way.
To clarify the position slightly further, what happened was the leader of his party on LBC was asked whether she would look at the triple lock, and her reply was, and I quote, "We're going to look at means testing. Means testing is something we don't do properly here." What did she mean by that?
Yes. Well, she replied no to the interviewer. She was not looking at means testing the triple lock. She was talking more generally about the challenge of means testing in our social security system, which I think is a legitimate question for us all to consider, as I shall go on to discuss. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I didn't want to get too partisan in this debate. But here we go. No, I won't genuinely, because this is a shared problem that we face across the House, the challenge of our welfare system. I will note in passing that our party's record on welfare is a good one. We introduced universal credit, rationalising the spaghetti web of benefits that we inherited from the Honourable Gentleman when he was last in office. We made work pay and helped people off welfare and into work, and we succeeded in this with 4 million more people in employment in 2024 than in 2010. And let me also point out that we had another mess to sort out in the public finances. When we took office, the government was running a deficit of 9%. The Treasury was spending way more than it was earning. But by the time the pandemic struck, the deficit was down to less than 1%. We were living within our means, and we were able to afford the generous uplifts that were made in the last Parliament to benefits and pensions, and also the huge package of support that we provided during the pandemic. But I want to be fair and admit that, as the Minister has suggested, the welfare system is not working properly at the moment. Too many people are being consigned to a life of inactivity and dependency, especially via the categories of sickness benefit. And it's bad for those people, bad for their communities, and bad for the country as a whole, including the taxpayer, who is spending £65 billion a year on incapacity and disability benefits, rising to £100 billion a year unless reforms are made by the end of this Parliament. So what is going on? These terrible figures reflect the fact that we have very bad rates of physical ill health, including obesity, and strongly evident in the statistics, bad backs, as we simply don't move around enough in the day. It also reflects a rise in mental ill health, which we see in alarming rates in schools and among young people. And so we have to do more on those issues through all sorts of interventions that lie more with DFE and DHSC than with DWP. But as the Lord's Economic Committee reported last week, the rise in welfare claims cannot be attributed to worsening health or longer NHS waiting lists. The problem is growing far faster than that. So maybe the problem is low wages that don't attract people into employment. And certainly that is a reality. The low wages have driven the demand for immigration that we've seen get so out of control in recent years. profound changes are underway in the world of work, away from secure employment to a more precarious jobs market. And I'm afraid to say Labour is now destroying jobs, taxing employment, discouraging new hires with their new employment rights bill. But the fact is that wages have risen sharply in recent years, above inflation, which is why, of course, the pension is going up by earnings this year. Employers are offering good wages and they're not filling vacancies. So the issue isn't health, although we have problems in health. The issue isn't work, although we have big problems there. The issue is welfare. It's that people aren't being incentivised to take those jobs because the offer from the welfare system is better. And when I say welfare, I don't mean unemployment support. Thanks to universal credit and the reforms of the last government, we saw record numbers of people move off unemployment benefit and into work. That's because we offered support to people to find work, and we imposed strict conditions that meant they had to be actively looking for a job, and if they didn't look, they lost the benefit. And this worked for a lot of people. But what we found, and here is the issue, for a lot of other people, the incentives made them go the other way, further away from work, into the sickness category, because this is where the good money is. In some cases, double what you can get on unemployment benefit, sometimes £3,000 more than the minimum wage. And you're almost certain to get it because the approval rates are now so high, over 90% for the limited capacity for work category. So this is big money, and it's unconditional money. There's no expectation to do anything about the health conditions that means you're signed off sick. There's no expectation of being reassessed any time soon or indeed ever. So that is the challenge, and I hope the government are going to rise to it in the same way that we rose to the crisis in unemployment benefit in the last decade. And we should hope that they are. Happy to give way.
One of the ways the last government helped to deal with this was dealing with the taper. It was at 63%, it went down to 55%, so people who were working got more of their own money back. Does he believe this is one way we can incentivise people to step back into the workplace by having more of their money as they earn it?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This was a key part of the reforms that were brought in towards the last part of the last decade, enabled by universal credit, a much simpler system. And I'm very glad to say that we did manage to reduce that taper significantly and incentivise work. So we're happy to give way.
Thank you to the Shadow Minister. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll try and not say you this time. I'm sorry. I would be interested to know, genuinely, what the opposition's position is on reform of the incapacity benefit system. It's a really knotty problem. I know when members opposite were in government, this was something that was considered, but I'm just not clear on what the position is at the moment from the opposition. I know the government's coming forward with proposals soon, so I would be genuinely interested to hear.
Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity. We did have a whole series of plans that sadly interrupted by the general election result, and I'll come on in a moment to some of the suggestions that I have for where I think the government might go. But we're really looking for the plan from the... Happy to give way.
Thank you so much. And one was talking, the gentleman was talking about incentivising people into work. From my surgeries in Torbay, I find that an awful lot of people are off sick with hip problems or mental health challenges, and the challenge that people have in getting back into work is the broken health system that was left by the previous Conservative government, and I hope that the new government will drive harder on fixing this system, because I know some people, many people on benefits are keen to get back into work. They are just unfit for work. Thank you.
Well, the honourable gentleman reflects the experience that many of us have in our surgeries. Nevertheless, I would point out to him, I don't think health reform on its own is going to do the job. As I mentioned, the House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee has looked into this, and they reported last week pointing out that the increase in welfare claims cannot be attributed to longer waiting lists or indeed to worsening health conditions. I'm afraid to say the welfare problem is outstripping the problems that we see in the nation's health. So we do have to do more in DWP, and we are hoping with bated breath to see some movement on that front. In fact, I mean, it was in this very debate last year that the member for Birkenhead, now a ministerial colleague of the Right Honourable Gentleman, when we were uprating benefits this time last year, she said, Labour has a plan. So that was a year ago. 7 months ago, they won the election. Labour apparently had a plan. She didn't say it was oven ready, but she sort of implied it. Now, I know the Minister says that the delay is because of a court case that happened 2 weeks ago. I don't quite understand how that explains the delay that's been going on for 7 months. And here we are approving a measure that will increase expenditure by nearly £7 billion, as the Honourable Gentleman just said. We have no idea how this bill is going to be brought down over time. But after much head-scratching in DWP, and we're told people pulling their hair out in number 10, we are getting closer to the big reveal. And we hear hints in the media, Madam Deputy Speaker, exciting hints. They might be going to scrap the limited capacity for work category altogether. They might be going to scrap the work capability assessment, merge ESA into the PIP system. They're going to require people on sickness benefits to engage with work coaches. Now, I've got to say I am encouraged by all this pitch rolling. If the government is softening up its backbenchers for some serious reform, then I applaud them for it. But I'll believe it when I see it, because the fact is the party opposite opposed every step towards tougher conditions, more assessments, more incentives to work. They opposed reforms that we were introducing to the fit note system. And in fact, I see from a written answer to a question in the other place that the government says it has no plans to reform the fit note system, which I regret. And I wonder if the Minister can help clarify if that's the case. But on universal credit, it does appear that the sinner repenteth, or sort of repenteth. They're on some kind of journey. In the last Parliament, they said they'd scrap universal credit. Then they said they'd replace it. And now, as we've heard, they're reviewing it, which is, I'm glad to hear it, although the Right Honourable Gentleman just said they're reviewing it over the course of this year. So that seems to be unrelated to the Green Paper process, which we're expecting in the spring. I'd like to understand how those two processes are aligned. But rather than scrapping or replacing or reviewing universal credit, I'd invite them simply to use universal credit. It's a flexible system. As we saw in the pandemic, it works and it just needs adapting to the new challenge. So let me make a few suggestions in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, for consideration as the Right Honourable Gentleman prepares his Green Paper and his Universal Credit Review. The Back to Work plan that we announced before the general election would have got 1.1 million people into work using more support and tougher conditions. More support, meaning more of the Work Well pilots, which my Right Honourable friend introduced, which I was glad to hear the Secretary of State praising yesterday, although without attribution, sadly. The work capability assessment should be face-to-face, in our view, and it should be asset-based, not deficit-based. It should be asking what you can do as a claimant, not what you can't do. And the claimant should begin the journey of recovery, the journey back towards work, then and there. So rather than budgeting, as we're doing today, for ever higher welfare, we should be investing in support, in the universal support system to run alongside universal credit. And we need tougher conditions. We simply can't have people with a bad back or anxiety being signed off sick for the rest of their lives. They need to know that we believe in them, and that believing in them means having high expectations of them. In exchange for benefits paid for by working people, they should take active steps when they can to address their physical and mental health needs. And they should work meaningfully on their own health and well-being. That won't look the same for everyone. And it must not be a tick-box exercise. That's why we need the help of civil society, not just coaches and therapists, providing the human touch and the range of help and opportunities that people need. But most of all, we need a clear message to go out from the government that unless you are so severely disabled or ill you genuinely can never work at all, you will not have a life on benefits. And that clear message, enacted through reform, which his department must bring forward urgently, is the only way to get the exorbitant welfare bills under control and to get our workforce and our economy moving again. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I call Debbie Abrahams, after which I will call Steve Darling. Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to start, if I may, just by commenting on the Shadow Minister's contribution just now. First of all, I think it's really, really important that in this place we use evidence, and that's to help and ensure that we have effective evidence-based policy. And when we are using policy-based evidence, I think that's quite dangerous. I'm referring to some remarks that he's made, both in terms of conditionality. Could I refer him to the evidence, for example, of a 2-year study that was undertaken by the University of York that showed that sanctions, tough sanctions, where people have died, who've lost their lives because of sanctions, he looks at that. There was no evidence to support stopping somebody's social security support, their money that they use to live with, for up to 2 years, because that was the period that the government of the time said that they could stop benefit, has real-life consequences. I could also refer him to his own Cabinet Office reports, which showed that sanctions were not effective in getting people into work. So please, we all need to be very responsible for the work we do. No, I'm not going to give away, I'm sorry. Could I also refer him, I'm a former public health consultant. The key drivers of ill health are socioeconomic determinants. There's so much evidence on this, it's going back decades, and I wonder why the party opposite aren't familiar with this, whether it's just because it's not palatable to them or inconvenient. But I'll give something far more recent, the COVID inquiry, which we debated a couple of weeks ago, showed very clearly that one of the reasons that we had such a poor experience, both in terms of morbidity, but also in terms of mortality, more than any other country in Europe, was because of our ill health. And it is a real disservice to the people who've lost their lives, who are enduring long COVID at the moment, and their families on their memories, to suggest that it's something else, let alone the people who are currently... No, I'm not going to give away. No, I'm not going to give away. I welcome the Social Security Order, and particularly the contribution of my right honourable friend in terms of what he has said. It was an absolute pleasure to serve on the Select Committee when my right honourable friend was the chair of that. On this bit, I will agree with the Shadow Minister. By his transfer from the Select Committee to the his ministerial position is very welcome, and the gravitas, the experience, but also his common decency in the role, I know we all share. But I want to talk about the context of this uprating order and the importance of our social security system in providing, at the very least, a safety net for people when they need it, from cradle to grave, like the NHS. But unfortunately, over the last 14-15 years or so, the adequacy of support for people on low incomes has been dramatically eroded, particularly for people of working age. Again, contrary to what the Shadow Minister was saying. Between 2010 and 2012, the uprating was about 1.5%. Between 2012 and 2016, it was 1%. And then between 2016 and 2020, it was 0. Of course, during that period, the average annual CPI increase for each of those years was about 3%. There has been a steady and consistent erosion in the value of social security support, and this has affected the value of universal credit, job seekers allowance, employment and support allowance, income support, housing benefit, child tax credits, working tax credits, and child benefits. The Resolution Foundation at the time estimated that it was equivalent to the cut of £20 billion a year from social security support for working age people. And that's not well understood, clearly, from the party opposite. What is not also was not understood is that these are predominantly people in low-paid work. The vast majority of people, and this is something for all of us to consider, the vast majority of people in receipt of working age social security support are or have been working people. There's only a tiny proportion of DWP spending which is spent on, for example, job seekers allowance, 0.001% of the current budget. Out of work support, as evidenced in the Work and Pension Select Committee report from last year, I do invite the Shadow Ministers to have a look at that, is at the lowest in real terms since 1912. You know, we are not, this is not a generous system. If you compare us against OECD comparisons, we are not supporting people in the way that a civilised society, as well off as we are, is. The consequences of having inadequate social security are clear. Last week's JRF poverty report made a very bleak read, and again I invite people to read that. Over 1 in 5 people in the UK, 21% are in poverty. That's 14.3 million people. Of these, 8.1 million are working age adults. 4.3 million children in poverty. That's 3 in 10 in the population as a whole. In my constituency, it's 1 in 2. 1.9 million are pensioners. Disabled people are at a greater risk of poverty, partly by virtue of the additional costs that they face with their disability and in health, and partly by the barriers to work that disabled people face. We have had a flatlining of in terms of disability employment, and the gap between people who are disabled and those who are disabled at work has been at about 30% for the last 14 or so years. It went down, I think, about 1%. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are 16 million people in the disabled people in the UK, nearly 1 in 4. Almost 4 in 10 families have at least one person who is disabled. But the poverty rate for disabled people at 30% is 10 percentage points higher than non-disabled people. And at 50%, this rate is even higher for living with a long-term limiting mental health condition, compared with 29% for people with a physical or other types of disability. There are other groups who are also disproportionately more likely to live in poverty, including informal carers, people from ethnic minority communities and lone parents. But given the media speculation that there has been about the future of disability support, I wanted to focus on this. Last year's Select Committee report on benefit levels set out a wide range of evidence which suggests that benefit levels are too low, and that claimants are often not able to afford daily living costs and extra costs associated with having a health condition or disability. While the Select Committee supports the government's ambition to get Britain working and a social security system that supports work, these are not achievable in a few months. Meanwhile, people are barely clinging on. The DWP doesn't have an expressed objective on how it will support claimants with daily essential living costs. In the Select Committee's reports, we recommended building a cross-party consensus to take this forward, and for the government to outline a benchmark and objectives linked to living costs to measure the effectiveness of benefit levels and to make changes alongside annual uprating. I would welcome my right honourable friends revisiting of this Select Committee report, and particularly the recommendations on this. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd just like to set out the consequences of our currently inadequate social security system. Firstly, from peer-reviewed articles, we know that for every 1% increase in child poverty, 6 babies per 100,000 live births fail to reach their first birthday. That's the consequence of living in poverty for children. Not just that, the honourable gentleman opposite, because of his medical training, will know much of this, but there's a rewiring of the brain that affects children living in poverty, that affects them for the rest of their lives. In another peer-reviewed piece that's in, I think it was 2017, it was published in BMJ, and it's entitled First Do No Harm. Metadata analysis looked at the changes to and reassessment of the work capability assessment between 2010 and 2013, and looked at the impacts that this had. And they looked at it from 149 local authority areas in England. For each additional 10,000 people who were reassessed, there were an additional 6 suicides. 2,700 additional cases of mental health problems, and over 7,000 more antidepressant scripts. This is evidence. I also, many people will know from my previous campaigns, want to refer to the deaths that we've seen from social security claimants whose benefits have been stopped. I'm going to mention again Errol Graham, a 52-year-old Nottingham man who basically had a severe mental health condition, and he starved to death after his social security support was stopped. There are so many others I could mention, and I just pay tribute to the families that have campaigned on their behalf for justice for them, because it is quite horrific. Madam Deputy Speaker, but talking about people who are surviving our social security system, TP, we'll use his initials, again a 52-year-old man, was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma, worked all his life, and sadly the diagnosis that he has was terminal. And he was trying to, he migrated from his particular incapacity support to universal credit and lost all his disability premiums. And he was one of the litigants for this case about transitional protections when migrating from ESA and disability premiums to universal credit. But this is an example of a case of somebody who's worked all their life. 4 out of 5 disabilities and health conditions are acquired. It could happen to any one of us. And I would just like us to consider that. Another one, case AB, born with congenital cerebral palsy, worked for 25 years, and then couldn't go on. If I read all of this out, we'd all be in tears. It is just so heart-rending. It really is. And describing the indignity of having to rely on such low-level support. I'll leave it there, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I know my right honourable friend takes this very, very seriously, and I hope all of us here will work towards making a more adequate social security system for those people. Thank you.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to acknowledge the very sobering and comprehensive speech just given by the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth. It is disturbing, and one would hope that our DWP and our government as a whole would take a trauma-informed approach to dealing with our communities, as that, in my belief, stands us in good stead. I would like to broadly welcome the proposals and upgrades that we've had within the proposals before us this afternoon, both for benefits and for pensions. And I'd like to first of all focus on the pensions, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sadly, the Labour government inherited a system where for the last 10 years we've seen an increase in pensioner poverty, and there are 2 million pensioners who remain in poverty, and 1 million are on the edge of poverty. And one would have hoped that a Labour Party that cut them in half, and it suggests social justice, would have driven that agenda harder in their first 7 months of being in power. The cuts to the winter fuel allowance has exacerbated this situation, and the Right Honourable Gentleman for East Wiltshire highlighted the backlogs that we've seen there now, and rightly so, that is totally unacceptable. Apologies if I got the constituency wrong, or the gentleman wrong, but The reality is that we have seen that pensioner poverty. And again, WASPy women, we know that women, and women are more likely to be victims of poverty, and yet WASPy women have been a victim, effectively, of a decision of this government. Whilst it was really pleasing that the Secretary of State welcomed the report, acknowledged the report, apologised, but sadly didn't actually action the report. And that gives me great displeasure, as well as many other people across the United Kingdom. It is in evidence to the Department of Work and Pensions Select Committee, it is disturbing that, that the Ombudsman suggested that there is usually a bit of a conversation between the Ombudsman and the government about what would be an acceptable system or compensation approach. But sadly, that never happened as far as WASPy women is concerned. Yeah. And one is disturbed to understand why that never happened. Why was there in the breakdown in communication between the Ombudsman and the previous Conservative government that appears to have happened? I'm looking to explore that with the Ombudsman in another way. As far as pensions are concerned as well, I'd also like to particularly highlight the issues around housing. Whilst I may have served my community for 30 years as a councillor, and therefore I'm very alive to some of the challenges that people face, housing is a massive issue. And it is disturbing that when reflecting on pensions, the cost of housing is rarely taken into account. And in 1979, we had 35% of our housing stock as social rented housing. It's now down to 17% across the United Kingdom. And in my own constituency of Torbay, it is as low as 17%. This means that people, whether they're pensioners or people who are on other benefits, if they're in constituencies such as mine, where there is a lack of social rented housing, they are particularly hard hit with that lack of support and the money that they will have to take away from putting food on the table to actually paying the rent. And so therefore it is with disappointment that the local housing allowance has not been enhanced in this round. My concern is that we are looking at almost 1 million children across the United Kingdom who will be living in households that have this gap between the benefits and what the cost of their accommodation is, and they will be driven even further into poverty. When I reflect on universal credit, colleagues have already mentioned the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's report recently. They highlighted that for a couple, there is a £55 gap a week in actually what covering the basics are and what they actually receive. That is a little over £2,800 a year that people are being driven even deeper into poverty just around the basics on their universal credit offer. Finally, I'd like to particularly touch on the carers allowance and that scandal. Whilst I welcome the engagement of the government and the review that's taken place, and we do as Liberal Democrats on this issue, there are still unanswered questions. We need to make sure that this is done at pace to support people, because it is the population of West Bromwich, 136,000 people that are affected by this, owing £250 million, who fell foul of a system where you only need to earn £1 more a week, and you don't owe £52, you owe £4,200. So we need to see tapers implemented here. And I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, the real challenges that we face is that the DWP service, sadly, is broken. It is not fit for purpose and it needs redesigning. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I would say that what we need to happen is, rather than driving new agendas, we need to lift the bonnet, and I have nothing but utter respect for the Secretary of State on this issue, lift the bonnet and redesign the system, get it fit for purpose, and most importantly, co-design it with people who are disabled or benefit users so that it can actually support... Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank my honourable friend for giving way. My honourable friend makes a powerful speech about those who are most in need of benefits and the difference it can make. He spoke about WASPy women and about children in poverty, but I wonder if my honourable friend would also agree that veterans could be helped out more by DWP. So, for example, if the government were to back the RBL's Credit Their Service campaign, which would change legislation so military compensation is not classified as income when calculating means-tested benefits. And I wonder if my honourable friend agrees that that group would benefit from such a change.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my honourable friend, you're right to highlight this. I know myself and my honourable friend from Eastbourne are actually awaiting a meeting with the Minister to explore this very issue about the RBL's Credit Their Service campaign. But just to the final couple of sentences of my comments is that I lived through a world of a broken children's services in Torbay, where we got our sleeves up, sorted it out, and we moved from failing to good within 2 years by getting the right people in place, by making sure that systems were sorted and driving culture change. We need that co-design with people who use the system so we can get the DWP sorted as well. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Dan Tomlinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I start by echoing the comments of others who've spoken in this debate in praising the Minister for his work on this issue over decades in this place. I saw it during my time working in the charity sector before becoming a Member of Parliament, in my time at the Resolution Foundation and most recently at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where I was working on these issues, and I always knew then that we had a friend in Parliament who cared deeply about the welfare system, who cared deeply about the needs of people receiving benefits, receiving support from the state, and who also, like me, wants to see more people being supported to move into employment. And so even though I'm not going to focus on that topic today, I want to talk about pensions, I do just want to put on record my thanks for his service, and I'm glad to see him as a minister. I want to start by talking about an institution that is often not talked about in this place, but that is so crucial to all of our lives and shapes a lot of politics, even though we don't remark on it too much. And that is the family. That is the institution that we're all closest to, almost all of us, I'm sure, and shapes so much of the way that we see the world. And I think it's important as policymakers, as people sitting here in the House of Commons, that we don't just think of individuals as people on their own who are separate from one another, and we remember that we all exist in families. If you look at someone's bio online, it might say they're a father, husband. You know, it's a big part of our identity, our families, and I think we should do well to remember that. And in particular, when it comes to decisions, Madam Deputy Speaker, around the pension, I think sometimes our politics, our media, might want to push us into discussing these topics in a way that rise up the salience of a war between the generations, and I just think nothing can be further from the truth. Yes, of course.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. You talk about the importance of family, and I can't agree more. But would you also agree that a family is a unit designed by that family, and actually an arbitrary limit of a two-child benefit cap does nothing to actually protect that family unit if they have more than 2 children?
Thank you for your intervention. I grew up in poverty. We had no money. Lived in social housing, had free school meals for my time as a child, was in emergency and temporary accommodation as well. And there were 3 of us. And I know that the benefit system was there for my mum and for us. And I have confidence that this government will make the decisions that we need to make to ensure that our welfare system is there for families like the one that I grew up in. I know there's a review that's looking at universal credit and the welfare system, and I look forward to that reporting in the months ahead. This is a really important issue, so thank you for raising it. When it comes to families, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, and the state pension, yes, I think often people want to pit the young and the old against one another. But actually, if you look at the evidence, one of the groups that's most supportive of increases in the state pension is young people. And I think part of that is because we, and I still call myself young, in my early 30s, we know and we've seen throughout our lives how much people who are retired, our grandparents, people who we know in the community have contributed to our lives and our families and also the lives of our communities. And actually also, when I put my economist hat on, it's actually the case that increases in the state pension and support for the triple lock, which we're steadfast in support for on this side of the House, will benefit young people the most. Because an extra few pence on the state pension today means an extra few pounds or tens of pounds, or depending on which generation we're talking about, hundreds of pounds in the future, because of the way these things compound over time. So it's really important that we continue to support the state pension and the triple lock. Yes, I'm happy to give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. I think he makes an excellent point about the long-term benefits to the economy that can take place if you treat the benefit system seriously. Will he also agree with me that this applies to the two-child cap as well? Because if we was to remove that cap, not only would we lift hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty, inherently a good thing, but we'll also improve health and education outcomes and ultimately make a more productive population over the long run.
Yeah. Thank you for his intervention again on an important topic, the same topic in fact. It is incredibly important, and I know that the government is looking at this issue and looking at the way in which we can reform the welfare system to support people to get the money that they need and have the incentives and the right approach to welfare to help more people get into employment. That is the long-term sustainable route to reducing poverty, and I hope that we can do more to do that. I am happy to give way, though. Maybe I should make some progress, but yeah.
In give way, he makes a fantastic point about the family unit. The last government, when it came to this, was looking at introducing household income, particularly around child benefit, to try and make sure that actually we don't see people as individuals, we see them as a group, to stop things like the child benefit cliff edge. However, the new government in the budget has taken that away. Would he make the argument to his front benches that actually looking at household units, i.e. the family unit, is actually a very positive way of seeing how we can support people?
I think it is important in some respects. I think one of the challenges in the policy that he identifies is around the fact that we tax people on an individual basis, and this is linked with, and the benefits that he's referring to are often linked with the tax system. But it is an important point, and I'm sure it's one that is also being considered. Let me make some progress just to conclude my remarks. So I'm very supportive of the increase in the state pension and of the triple lock. I know we've already had a little ding-dong about it, but it is the case that the Shadow Chancellor did say it was unsustainable. Maybe he was referring to the long term, but still that does concern me, not least given what I've said about young people being the people who in the end will benefit most from increases in the state pension over time. But I'm very glad that the 20,000 pensioners in my constituency of Shipping Barnet will be either receiving £470 uplift in the state pension in April if they're on the new state pension, or I believe it's £360 if they're on the basic rate of the state pension. That's incredibly important for living standards, and also one of the things that we see in family and the care that, you know, I spent many years actually living with my grandparents part-time, and they taught me a lot. Lots of my values have come from them. We know how much care older people can provide to family and to their communities, and I see that in Shipping Barnet. Almost whenever I'm at a community event, maybe a local church or an institution, a charity that's doing good in the community, there's so many people who are retired there, doing good, giving their time, giving themselves to care and to making Barnet, my corner of North London that I have the pleasure of representing, a better place to live. And providing that security in retirement is so very important, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you.
John Milne, are you... no? OK, we will go on to Seamus Logan then.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, I want to endorse the warm words of the Shadow Minister. in paying tribute to the Minister and the work that he's done in previous parliaments. As a recently elected member, I wasn't here, but I was aware of the work that was being done. I think some of the contributions we've had in this debate so far have been extremely powerful. Seems to be an inverse proportion in terms of the quality of the debate and the number of members present. In my contribution today, I rise not to oppose these orders, but I will focus specifically on the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, or GMP. The order gives applicable pension schemes the percentage by which they need to uprate GMP entitlement built up between 1988 and 1997. This year, the increase is 1.7%. Wow. Which was informed by the CPI figure for the year to September 2024. But while this increase and the other increases are welcome, it won't even touch the sides. Because remember, you've taken away the winter fuel payment. You've seen numerous increases in energy costs. We're seeing rising food prices because of policies in relation to national insurance contributions and now the family farm tax. These matters are reserved, but all those years ago, 2014, we were promised in the run-up to the referendum that we would receive maximum devolution. That has not happened. Yet in Scotland we've had to introduce 7, and people in Scotland may not know this, 7 different benefits to mitigate the effects of decisions made here in Westminster. Fair pensions are necessary for ensuring dignity in old age, but we must be aware of the unintended consequences that changes make to the pension system. During the transition to single-tier pensions in 2016, the DWP was found by the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman to have not provided clear and accurate information that some pension holders were worse off under the changes. By the DWP's own figures, this was about 50,000 people that would lose out. This failure in communication seems emblematic of an outdated approach to social security that saw people unfairly treated when changes were made to their pension provision. We saw this happen again with the WASPy woman. The PHSO, the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman, again found that the DWP had committed maladministration in communicating these pension changes to WASPy women. Pensions and pension provision are wide-reaching. Last week, I raised the issue of prison officers and changes to their pension scheme, meaning that some of them will be working until they are 68. I would again impress upon the Government to really consider the unintended consequences of this and all other future pension changes. This is perhaps even more pertinent now as the state pension age is due to rise for both men and women to 67 between 2026 and 2028 and 68 between 2044 and 2046. The DWP failed on previous occasions when it came to communicating these changes to people regarding their pensions. We have a new government, and if you won't allow the Scottish people to determine their own future in these matters, or you won't devolve these matters to the Scottish Government, all I can ask is that you will deliver fairness in pensions, because people need certainty when it comes to their retirement plans. I agree with the member for Torbay when he mentioned the forthcoming review of the welfare system, and I wholeheartedly endorse the quiet words spoken by the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth when she made her very powerful intervention, and you talked about the socio-economic determinants of ill health. That message cannot go unnoticed by the DWP in these matters. Thank you.
Shockat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a real honour to participate in this debate. I may not be as illustrious as previous contributors to this debate, but I'll try my best to make whatever small impact I can. And I would like to start by commenting on a point made by the Shadow Secretary about believing in people, about wanting the best for them. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. We want the best for people, and we believe that they can be the best that they can. But simply believing is not enough. Simply believing in my children to achieve great grades at school without sending them to school or giving them the facilities and the tools to is not enough. Simply wanting my team, who is in the relegation zone, not to be relegated by belief is not going to be enough without investing in that football team. And when we've had underinvestment, especially in the mental health sector, I think we need more than just believe in order to achieve and alleviate those problems. And also, I believe that it's rather damaging in the semantics that we use, specifically to our GPs, whose credibility we are sometimes questioning when they were signing people off. And furthermore, I would like to welcome the increase in pensions from the Secretary of State. But at this moment in time, as has been mentioned by my colleagues, there are 1.9 million pensioners in the UK who are living in relative poverty. Pensioners are missing meals, having to shelter in libraries, and are really depressed due to the government's cuts in the winter fuel payment. And research conducted by Unite the Union has shown that over 2/3 of its retired members are having to turn down their heating. A third are taking fewer baths and showers, and 16% have cut back on hot meals due to the increased cost of trying to stay warm. Heating or eating is an absolute reality for many people. It is just words that we utter in this chamber. In addition, over 63% of people have said that they felt more cold more often, and 17% are reporting the cut has resulted in them becoming ill or the symptoms have become worse. This is burdening our overstretched NHS that is already overstretched. And we must find a way, if possible, Minister, if we can ask for the release of statistics for excessive deaths caused due to the cold weather. So, fundamentally, I would like... Glenn.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. You're making a very powerful case. Would you agree with me that...
Please be seated. I'm sure he's not intervening on me, so the word "you" isn't appropriate. Continue. Intervention should be brief.
I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that in the same way that the Government is addressing the issue of child poverty by setting up a child poverty task force, they should really be doing the same when it comes to pensioner poverty and setting up a pensioner poverty task force?
I thank the Honourable Member, and I couldn't agree more. If we can, that would be absolutely vital for all the pensioners. I think the pensioners that email me on this issue is in the top 3 ever since I've been elected for the last 7 months. It's a real issue. If we can, alongside increasing the pensions, if we can either reverse the cuts to the winter fuel payment, it would essentially save lives. Thank you.
Well, that concludes all the backbench contributions. I believe that the Minister would like to do a short wind-up, Sir Stephen Tim.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, if I may, can I start by thanking everyone who's contributed to this debate. There have been some very helpful contributions on important issues, and I'm grateful for the support that's been expressed for the measures in the orders and for the kind things said about me as well, which I'll enjoy while they last. But let me particularly thank the Shadow Minister for drawing attention to the contributions of others who've spoken in these debates in the past. And he named Paul Maynard, David Linden, Nigel Mills, I think, and he's absolutely right to do so. I'm particularly grateful to Nigel Mills for his help in the work of the Select Committee. And I'm delighted that the Select Committee is in now such good hands with my honourable friend, who made a very important contribution to the work of the committee in the last Parliament, including influence over the whole direction of the committee, an important and positive influence. She's highlighted, again, as she often does, the position of vulnerable benefit claimants and how they are looked after, and I'm looking forward to giving evidence to her in the committee next week as that inquiry resumes from the work of the committee in the last Parliament. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Torbay. He's called for a taper in carers allowance. He'll have heard the Chancellor announcing in the budget in November that we are going to look at the case for a taper, and I'm hoping to be able to update the House reasonably soon on that. My honourable friend from Chipping Barnet, I'm grateful to him for what he said, but he was right to draw attention to the high level of support amongst young people for the triple lock policy. This is a matter that matters right across the age range. The honourable member for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East was right to call for certainty about pensions. People do need to know what the position is going to be when they reach retirement age. The last Labour government reduced the number of pensioners below the poverty line by 1 million. Sadly, as we reminded in this debate, it's gone up again over the last few years. We want to get back on the better track we were on before, and that it was picked up in the remarks of the honourable member for Leicester South as well. Let me give way to the honourable member.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Would he agree with me that the two measures which the government could take that would make a serious impact on the levels of poverty would be to restore the winter fuel payment and abolish the two-child cap?
Well, I've spoken already in the debate about the two-child cap, and we will be coming forward with the report and the strategy proposed by the Child Poverty Task Force. On pensioner poverty, I think substantial measures are going to be needed, and we will come forward with those in due course.
The Minister for taking another intervention, and my question is about, he talked about planning for the future and people understanding what's going ahead with their pensions. We had the example of Waspy where that wasn't seen to be the case. The new government is changing the inheritance tax and where pensions fall now. A lot of the public don't realise this is going to have big implications on them because their pensions are now going to be taxed in inheritance tax. Would he consider doing a campaign to let people know that that change is coming in the next year or so?
Well, I'm not quite sure what change he's referring to, but I can certainly agree with him that people need to be confident about what the arrangements are going to be in the future so that they can plan accordingly. And that's one of the reasons why I think the pensions triple lock is important, to give people confidence about how things are going to be in the future. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are increasing the basic state pension and the new state pension in line with earnings growth by 4.1%, meeting our commitment to the triple lock. We're increasing the pension credit standard minimum guarantee in line with earnings growth by 4.1%. We're increasing benefits to meet additional disability needs and carers benefits in line with prices. And we're increasing working age benefits in line with prices as well at 1.7%. This year, GMPs accrued between 1988 and 1997 must, by law, be increased by 1.7%, which is, again, the increase in the Consumer Price Index in the year up to September 2024. And the GMP is important in giving people assurance about a level below which their scheme pension cannot fall. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend both of these orders to the House.
The question is the motion on the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order. As on the order papers, many that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to the motion on the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order. Minister to move formally.
Move formally.
The question is the motion on the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order. As on the order papers, many that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'll let the ministers on the front bench quickly swap over.